So welcome everybody. Welcome to the first Library Publishing Coalition webinar of the fall term for 2017, or spring term if you're in the South. This webinar is presented by the Library Publishing Coalition's Professional Development Committee. So thank you very much for coming. And just to let you know, we're always looking for new ideas, new topics to explore. So if there's something that you're interested in finding out more about, or someone you want to hear more from, let the committee know, and we're happy to work with you to organize something like that. Today we're incredibly lucky to have with us two members of the Hypothesis team. We have Heather Staines, who's the Director of Partnerships with Hypothesis, and Jeremy Dean, who's the Director of Education at Hypothesis. Hypothesis is doing some fantastic work in the area of web annotation. Things that they're working on, I think, are highly relevant to the library publishing community, certainly, and for the various projects that we're working on, and move over into areas of open education as well as open publishing. So fantastic to have them. We'll allow them to give their presentation. The chat is turned on, so you can drop your questions in there. But we'll also have some time at the end for general discussion and questions as well. So we're ready to go. I'll leave it to you to take it away.
Thanks, Kevin. Hi, I'm Heather Staines. As Kevin said, I'm the Director of Partnerships for Hypothesis, and joined by my colleague, Jeremy. We're excited to be here today, and we thank the Coalition for inviting us to present. First, I'd like to give just a quick overview of what we'll be covering today. I'll give a little intro to Hypothesis. I'll follow that up with a very brief demo. Then I'll go over some of the main publisher use cases that we're encountering. I'll hand off to Jeremy to tell us a little bit about how Hypothesis is being used in the education space. Then we'll kind of wrap things up talking about how to work with Hypothesis, both the technology and the company. And hopefully we'll have some time for Q&A at the end. So Hypothesis is a little bit unique in that we're a not-for-profit tech company. We're funded primarily by foundation grants. You can see some of our funders there on the page, the Omidyar Network, Mellon, Helmsley, Shuttleworth, Knight, amongst others. As a mission-driven nonprofit, we get to do things a little bit differently. We are beholden to partners who share our vision, not investors who share our company. So we won't be bought by the competition. We've been able to target small, engaged communities and to grow strategically over time. We write open source software that brings together other parts of the community, and we apply open standards for that same reason. Our vision is to create a unified, interoperable architecture of annotation layers across all scholarly literature. That could include a public layer for annotations that are visible to everyone, private group layers for courses, journal clubs, and the like, publisher layers, which we'll talk about in just a little bit, as well as personal notes. In February of 2017, we were very excited that the W3C standards body for the web did approve annotation as a web standard. Now, what does that mean? That means in future browsers, annotation will be built natively into them, so that in the same way that you select your default search engine, you'll be able to tell your browser which annotation client or clients you prefer to use. So we're very excited about that happening. So from our perspective, we feel it's extremely important that researchers and readers be able to make annotations anywhere that they are on the web, regardless of whether that annotation has been enabled by the underlying content. But publishers can bring this same capability to their content by intentionally embedding it. In doing so, they can enhance their content and bring an open collaborative tool chain to their authors, therefore avoiding the need for content to be downloaded and uploaded to another platform in order to get unique annotation and other capabilities there. So kind of bringing the attention back to the publisher version. With our vision to annotate the web in mind, we created the Annotating All Knowledge Coalition back in 2015. This currently consists of more than 70 publishers, tech companies, and universities dedicated to promoting web annotation in all of its forms. Our next meeting for the Annotating All Knowledge Coalition is at the end of October in conjunction with the Force 11 meeting in Berlin. If you're interested in learning more about the coalition or in attending the event, don't hesitate to reach out to us. We'd be happy to tell you more. Our growth has been picking up recently. We celebrated just this week our 1.7 millionth annotation. It's interesting when you look at the breakdown of the annotation, about 24% are made in the public layer and about 50% take place in private groups. So now I'd like to do a very brief demo. So let me exit out of my full screen here for a second. I mentioned earlier the W3C approval of annotation as a web standard. Until annotation comes natively built into browsers, I do need to use an extension or a plugin to bring Hypothesis to the site. You can see that up here in my Chrome browser. And here's the client open to the right side of the page. Earlier today, I went to the Library Publishing Coalition directory and found this Carnegie Mellon University publication, the Journal of Privacy and Confidentiality, an article, How Will Statistical Agencies Operate When All Data Are Private? I thought that looked interesting. So let's take a look at the PDF. So as I'm looking at this PDF, come across something that I want to take note of. I simply select the text. Hypothesis will ask me if I want to highlight or make an annotation. So I'll select annotation, and now I can make my note. This is interesting. Hypothesis will ask me if I want to post it just for me or if I want to post it to the public layer. I'll select public in this case. Now I have an annotation that is connected to this particular piece of content, and anyone coming to the platform with a Hypothesis account will be able to see the note that I made. Now, in addition to choosing between a public annotation and a completely private annotation, you also have the ability to make groups. So earlier I made a group called Annotating for LPC. So let's go back to my article here. Let's find something else that we think looks interesting and select the text. Let's use annotate. Now, instead of putting it into the public, I've got it in my private group. So I can go ahead and make another note. Learn more about this. I can add some tags, privacy, data, and I post it to my Annotating for LPC group. So someone else in the group may come along later and reply to that. Yes, very interesting. And maybe they've got, maybe they want to tag it statistics. So in addition to having a threaded reply tied to a piece of text in one document, you can connect documents across the web. So this is the US Census Bureau Data Protection and Privacy Policy. So as I'm going through and taking a look at that, let's say I want to post some information to my group here. So I'll annotate. What do you think about this? And maybe I'll tag it census, maybe data. And I will post it to my Annotating for LPC group. And someone else may come along and reply to my conversation there. Now I can grab the link for this annotation and go back to my original annotation that I made on the Carnegie Mellon PDF, and I can edit mine, learn more about this. Also look at this policy, and I can just drop the link in for that annotation. And now I've got two documents that are connected across the web via this link. Now, when you create a group in Hypothesis, you automatically get a dashboard for that group. So you can see as I'm creating these annotations across the web, they're automatically populating here to the page. I can get back to the original article for any of these by just selecting the arrow key. Also, the tags that I've been creating are populating my tag cloud here to the right. So if I want to see just the articles that I have tagged privacy, I can filter on those and I can see them. This group page, you can see when this was created. You can see the members of the group, and you can use the link down here at the bottom if you want to invite additional users to the group. So for a collaboration tool, it's very useful. Let's go back to our presentation, and I want to show you some publisher use cases. So as we've been reaching out and talking to publishers, we've come up with a variety of very interesting use cases that they've put forward around annotation. I want to talk to you just about a few of those today. The first is post-publication collaboration discussion layer on publisher content. So this is a really frequently requested feature. Here's an instance of a discussion between University of Texas graduate students and their professor over an ebook that's published on the University of Michigan platform. In this case, even the author of the publication has joined the discussion. Remember that I said you can use Hypothesis anywhere on the web without the need for a site to install it. But some publishers have actually asked us if they can have their own publisher branded layer, and we call this publisher groups. The first publisher group is going to be coming later this fall with the publisher eLife, so we're looking forward to that launch. So publisher groups are publisher branded and moderated groups that can be publicly visible by default when readers land on a publisher page. The publishers can decide who has the ability to create annotations and who has the ability to read them. It's completely flexible. Here is an example of one way that publisher can let readers know that annotations are available on a page. It's just a button. It can even list the number of annotations that exist on an article. When users click on a button, then the client opens up and they can see the annotations. In this case, the publisher has decided to have Hypothesis accounts auto-generated for logged in users, so they don't have to already have a Hypothesis account or navigate away from the page to create one. They can just start annotating. The idea behind interoperable and standards-based technology is that annotation clients can talk to different servers and even other clients. This view shows that in addition to seeing that there are annotations in the publisher layer, the Acme journal layer there, a Hypothesis user can see that there are annotations in the public layer, a private reading group, and also part of a class that the user is a part of. That way you can direct your annotations to the appropriate layer. Another example of the way that publishers are working with annotations is using them to create new content. So Hypothesis can easily plug into existing workflows so that journal staff, book staff, authors, and invited experts can use annotation to create additional content. Now that might be author updates, it could be connecting additional supplemental resources, or invited expert commentary. And all of that will be visible in the publisher branded layer by default when readers land on the page. Here's an example of annotation connecting content to Washington Post article. Remember, you can use it anywhere, so it can connect scholarly resources out to mainstream media and vice versa. A third example of how publishers are working with annotation is in the peer review process. To enable inline annotation by reviewers and inline reply by journal staff and authors right there on the manuscript. It's possible to do single blind, double blind, or even open peer review, and some publishers have indicated that they'd like to make reviewer summaries visible as additional content. We think that's really cool. This is a screenshot of the eJournal Press peer review workflow on an AGU Journal of Geophysical Research. Now I'm going to hand over to Jeremy.
Great, thanks, Heather. And I'm just going to drop into the chat one more time our slides, mostly because I'm going to talk pretty quickly, and my slides include a lot of links to resources for people moving forward. So I'm the Director of Education at Hypothesis, and my focus is going to be on how this tool gets used in the classroom, how it can get used in the classroom. So it's really directed at folks that are teaching librarians or teaching themselves and want to use a new tool in the classroom. And one that is not really a new technology in a lot of ways, right? We've been writing in books for centuries. This is clearly like some middle schooler or freshman in high school's notes in the margins of a text. And as books move online, we lose this ability. But also as we move online, and I have to sort of wink at Heather to advance the slide or do something. I'm just going to maybe by cadence. Also, as books move online, and annotation moves online, there's a lot of other potentialities for empowering readers. Most notably that reading can become social in powerful new ways through annotation. But really the best way to show you this is to show you some examples. So let's move on to some examples of how it's being used in the classroom. Really the vast majority of our users at Hypothesis are classroom users. And our growth over the past 2 years of being in classroom has been pretty remarkable. I think in the first year we increased our education use about 8-fold, and yet to be seen what the numbers look like for this fall as courses get started. But we know that I believe one of our top days, if not the top day of most annotations created in a day, the past 2 days have really have been 2 of the top days in the history of the service. And there were no robots involved. It was all human annotators, classroom annotators. I think there were like 7,000 plus annotations created yesterday. So this is a PDF being annotated by grad students. And a quote from a professor at the University of Colorado who talks about how he's able to really ensure that his students are reading through this by giving them an assignment that he can sort of see them doing in the reading. He knows that they've done it. There's something sort of measurable in that way. But he's also getting to students to engage with that reading and with each other in new ways. Something that's often been given to the discussion forum, this idea of trying to get students to engage before class with content and with each other, can now be done, I think, in a more robust way through inline annotation, where the discussion forum really moves to the side of a text itself and is grounded more firmly in the text. And the discussion forums arise naturally from student commentary. So that was an example of annotation on a PDF, really important. I want to stop on one point just because I know probably in the libraries we're dealing with a lot of PDFs coming through databases and journals and things like that. There's some really cool things that we do with PDFs and how it works differently from web annotation, because every PDF has a fingerprint. We can triangulate users on a PDF via that fingerprint rather than a URL. So if I was to download an article from JSTOR and anybody on this chat downloaded the same article from JSTOR, those PDFs would have a link that we can detect in Hypothesis. And if each of us uploaded those PDFs to our browsers separately, local files to our browsers, or open them in our browsers rather, we could annotate simultaneously and collaboratively on a PDF in that way. So some really neat functionality around the PDF, but you can also annotate on the open web, as this class at University of Pittsburgh Greenberg is doing at Project Gutenberg. There's a quote here in the next slide from a teacher just talking about close reading, deep reading, active learning, and how this technology really enables that. So let's move on one more. This is a great project some of you may have heard of and has a lot of relevance both to classroom applications but also to other applications. We have a WordPress plugin that allows you to get rid of that browser extension that Heather was using and instead just have Hypothesis active on your platform. You can add JavaScript to a website and do this as well, but if you're working in WordPress or you're working in something like Pressbooks, which is WordPress based, you can basically just turn Hypothesis on so that any user arriving on the page will see annotations and with an account can create annotations, which is a really awesome functionality for sort of teachers are putting together their own textbooks in something like Pressbooks, which this professor did at Plymouth State. This is Robin DeRosa. Or if you're creating OER textbooks in the libraries at your universities or any kind of publication at the university, and you're using something like Pressbooks or Scalar, both of those platforms allow for you to just kind of turn on Hypothesis. And in Pressbooks specifically, you can turn it on when you want it on and turn it off when you want it off. So some pages can have it, some pages cannot have it. We don't quite have that granularity in the Scalar implementation yet, but it's still pretty cool. And then I think there's a great quote from a student on this one. from this class where she talks about hypothesis as her literary Facebook. When I'm reading, I sometimes wonder, does anyone actually understand this? And with this brilliant tool, I know I'm not alone. So she published a blog at the end of her course about her experiences in using hypothesis, and I really like this idea of social reading in the classroom, or the text kind of becoming a space that we can inhabit together and have conversations within. So let's move on from this to some more complicated uses of hypothesis. This is a project at the in the Perseus database of classics texts out of Tufts. And you can see from the margin here that the annotations are programmatically done. The students were assigned, this is a more advanced digital humanities sort of application of hypothesis. The student annotations were somewhat programmatic, not too interesting, not really a close reading thing that they were doing. It's more of a deep reading. You can see what they did was they put in these annotations sort of programmatically, and then in the next slide you can see the cool visualizations that they created when they harvested the data from those annotations using the API. So they were able to create a map of geographic map, and also mapping relationships and mapping people to places in new ways. So one cool thing about hypothesis, it does do this kind of like, bring a class together and have a conversation in the margin of a text, but because it's an open source technology, because it's an open API, there's lots of cool ways that folks who have the skills can take the technology and run with it, take the technology and do something, totally sort of unexpected with it, like this case. And the next one is from the American Academy of State Colleges. Is it one back from that maybe? American Academy of State Colleges and Universities, largely really spearheaded by Mike Caulfield at, let me get this right, Washington State, Vancouver, I believe. I always get it wrong. This is his digital polarization project. And so there are classrooms. This is another browser extension that uses some hypothesis technology and some other kinds of technology to mobilize students as fact checkers, basically, and researching the history of a particular claim across the web, from an article that might make a claim about climate change all the way back to where that claim, to substantiate it or find if it has verifiable origins, or if it is indeed verifiable fact. So they leverage hypothesis largely to tag documents and collate documents that are related in a single place in a really neat way that then allows them to leverage all the sort of harvesting, the gathering that they've done, and mobilize it towards a sort of statement about the fact of a claim. You could see that also being done in reading, right? That if a student is using hypothesis across, say, a library database, a bunch of library databases, JSTOR, Project Muse, annotating articles, if they're tagging their articles, all these tags and their annotations are going to appear in their profile, and then they can leverage all that content, all that work in the paper writing process. All right, so that is, and then this final example is, all these other ones are students annotating published content on the web and PDF, scholarly publications, and others. It also gets used quite often by teachers to have students annotate each other's writing. So as I said, we have a WordPress-based plugin. This, I think, is actually a class using it with Tumblr. So the students are writing blogs, and instead of having comments, having each other comment on each other's blogs or respond in other blogs, the professor had them annotate each other's blogs and provide feedback, and he was providing feedback as well. This guy, Sophist Monster, is the professor. I think he's at St. Louis University. And this was a really neat thing to see, just because, it's a great way to get peer review done, to get, is that what they call it? I get confused between scholarly peer review, but also, yeah, so you do this in rhetoric classes, right? Peer review of each other's writing, giving each other feedback. They were getting this every blog they wrote. So by the end, they just had all this feedback to go into their final summative assignments. So those are my examples, and I'll just briefly talk, and then I think give Heather the floor again about our integrations. I've mentioned some of this before, but these are all live links to examples, to the plugins or tools themselves, and then there's also some links to tutorials we've created for them. We have a WordPress plugin, as I said. You can look at my blog as an example of a WordPress blog that integrates integrates hypothesis. We have a Canvas app that's currently in a beta stage, but I'll be talking a little bit more about that later. But you can jump on this sample course if you're interested, if your school is a Canvas school, and see that functionality at work. There's a Pressbook integration. There's a link to Robin's textbook, but also to just a poem by Billy Collins, Marginalia, that I find inspiring about annotation in a Pressbook instance of my own. There's a Scalar version of that poem that you can check out. And then, of course, it can just be embedded on a website through JavaScript. So University of Michigan Library has done this across a wide range of content published out of the University of Michigan, several journals. Heather showed earlier a book. So all of at least some of the series within the digital publishing press there are free online books, and Hypothesis is natively active there. So it's just on all the time if you visit those books. So those some of those integrations. I'll dive quicker into WordPress and just say, you know, there's the links to the tutorials, and this just shows you that you can turn it on for PDFs hosted in a WordPress instance, a WordPress blog, and you can also allow it on all posts, or more granularly, say, you know, just these posts, and put in IDs for posts or pages so that it only appear in certain places and not in others. And then I think I'll say something about the Canvas integration next. We're really pushing on the Canvas integration because we know a lot of schools are using LMSs these days. So the Canvas integration is the first of many LMS integrations. The cool thing about the Canvas integration is that you can configure Hypothesis to appear on readings, whether they're PDFs or public web pages. And then if we move to the next slide, you'll see you can create assignments. They don't have to be assignments. They can just be readings, but you can in Canvas create an assignment, and then a student would submit their annotations. I'm really excited about this as a former English professor and high school English teacher, because you'll have that discussion on the page, conversation between students that, you know, we know is healthy for them in their intellectual growth. But then you can see just one student's slice, of that conversation, just their contributions to a conversation, and give them feedback. Yes, you can grade it if you want to grade it, but I think more importantly, you can look in on just Heather's contributions and see if she's really close reading, see if she's responding and listening to her classmates, or whatever it is that you want the students to be doing. You're able to suddenly see just the slice of their work and give them feedback. Which I just think is remarkably powerful. It's sort of a mysterious thing when you're teaching, you know, students to read. I've taught 7th grade and also taught college English, and it's sort of mysterious. You send them home with a book, and you just hope they come back comprehending it. But now you can get a sort of window into that comprehension and a window into the development of their thinking. This is the view in SpeedGrader within Canvas of a student's annotations. So we'll move on from that. I think that might actually be it. And yeah, and this is just final resources for the Canvas app. There's an install guide, but also teacher and student guides. I think with that, I'll hand it back over to Heather. Sort of, I guess this is a joint one. And you're still on mute, Heather.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. So we just wanted to tell you a little bit about how you can work with and implement Hypothesis. So because we're open source, you can integrate Hypothesis code into your website yourself. Some of the things that Jeremy mentioned. This is our basic freemium model. We're permissively licensed, and we do have links to tools and other resources on our website. If you want something that's a little bit more custom, for example, publisher groups, then we're happy to help you with the implementation. We have a simple pricing model based on the number of documents that you publish annually. If you work with a platform host, we're probably already in conversations with them about how to implement Hypothesis for you. We can customize the client to best fit your UI, and we've got a whole program of rolling out annotations internally and externally to help you succeed in meeting your goals around annotation. So if you have any questions about any publisher-related integrations, don't hesitate to email me, Heather@Hypothesis, and I'll be happy to help you.
So we are launching, you know, right now you can use Hypothesis in a course. You can use the Canvas app in a course. But we're launching a pilot program for full sort of scale integration of the Canvas app in the winter. That's going to have some features that it currently doesn't, which are account creation, assignment to groups, and auto login. So a student will just show up in a Canvas course and a PDF will have Hypothesis on it. They'll be automatically logged in and their identity within Hypothesis will be synced to their Canvas identity. And they basically will just have a seamless experience of annotating that PDF. It'll basically appear as if it's part of Canvas. And it'll have that annotations assignments, and we'll be, providing training and resources and technical support for our pilot school. So if you are a Canvas school and you're interested in being part of the pilot program, do reach out to me at Jeremy Dean and Hypothesis and see if we can work something out to start in the fall with a little pilot cohort. It is going to be a cool opportunity to help guide the roadmap for Hypothesis development to be part of this pilot program, because we're sort of, putting the Canvas app out there early and then hoping to get serious feedback from our early partners. It's also a really neat opportunity if you're in a position to connect with researchers in education to do some early research about the efficacy of annotation in the classroom, and are students indeed writing and thinking and writing better as a result of collaborative annotation. And then next fall, we'll be launching a partnership program with a full LTI app and also authenticating through other platforms as well. So maybe we'll be authenticating with the university ID, and then a student could use Hypothesis within WordPress or the LMS that the school uses, or really on the open web or any platform. And for that, we're going to have training programs and pedagogical support and tier 1 technical support and resources available, and of course, hosting and maintenance.
So we're happy to take any questions that you might have.
That's great, Heather. Thank you. Thanks, Jeremy. Fantastic. Yes, please do either drop a question in the chat, or if you want to unmute and ask your question, that would be great too. There's a question in the chat from Amanda. How does it work when you do public annotation? Does it show up to anyone who views that web page?
Right, so that depends on whether the page is natively integrated in Hypothesis, like through the JavaScript, or the publishers decided to enable Hypothesis sort of natively. In that case, yes, you'd see the Hypothesis sidebar when you show up, and the public annotation would be visible to you. Mostly, Hypothesis gets used as a browser extension. So today I was annotating at the Atlantic magazine, so atlantic.com, I think it is, and I was annotating publicly there. But if you went to that Atlantic article by Ta-Nehisi Coates, you wouldn't see my annotations if you didn't know anything about Hypothesis, or you didn't turn on your browser extension. So it's not disrupting the normal readership of the Atlantic, but if you have the browser extension installed, there will be a little badge in the corner of your browser that says there are, I think I made 4 annotations. So if nobody else has added annotations, it'll say 4 annotations on that Ta-Nehisi Coates article, and you can then activate it and see my annotations. But normally these annotations would not show up publicly on a site that hasn't already negotiated some kind of partnership with Hypothesis, or unless the user themselves has activated Hypothesis, the reader.
Great, thanks, Jeremy. Another question there from Sarah about experience with other types of files like audio or video.
We get a lot of questions about audio and video. We don't currently have the capability, although for platforms where transcript is created, you can, of course, annotate the transcript that comes along with the video or the audio file. This is something that we do have on the roadmap. I mentioned, working with partners, towards a common cause. For example, publisher groups were developed in conjunction with a partner that really needed that capability, felt that it was essential before they could launch Hypothesis embedded in their site. So if a partner comes to us who is very, very keen to enable annotation of audio or video files, we can talk to them about moving that priority up in the roadmap and maybe sponsoring that feature so that it can come to the community more quickly.
Yeah, and I'll just add that I would expect image annotation to come along more quickly than video. We've experimented with that already, and we have a lot of partners in our coalition of annotation nerds that congregate every year at our Annotate conference that are doing image annotation specifically. People working at IIIF and Mirador and things like that. So we're working closely with those folks, and you know, we have had prototypes in the client before, and I'd expect image annotation before video. But the only other thing I'll add that I didn't mention before is that, of course, you can add images and video into annotations. So it's a totally different use case, perhaps, but you can make these very media-rich annotations in the margins of these texts, which, of course, can bring the text to life in some powerful ways, especially in the classroom.
Yeah, I have a 5-minute demo, which goes a lot deeper into the capabilities around annotation that I can share with Kevin, and he can maybe share it out to the group as well. There's a question I see about a PDF viewer and Hypothesis not playing well with it. Probably that PDF viewer is operating as an iframe on the page, and with just the regular Hypothesis, JavaScript, it's not able to see into that iframe. We can, it's very simple to fix that, and so just I would say just reach out, and we're happy to help you fix that so that the client actually sees inside the iframe rather than the page.
Yeah, and I know we've actually been doing some recent work with iframes that might make that even easier. But certainly get in touch with things like that if there's a particular platform that's not working for you.
An easy fix.
So then there's this million-dollar question, right? How are public annotations moderated? So we just added a flag feature, so a user can flag an annotation if they find it offensive in some way, and then that currently sends a message to our staff that can then decide whether it is appropriate according to our terms of service. But this is an ongoing issue of the problem of moderation that we are really trying to be very thoughtful about, and have had a lot of conversations with experts in the field of online abuse and other systems that have had problems with moderation, like Twitter, or not successfully done it. So it's an open question, but one we're working really hard on. And the current answer is that there's a flag feature where content can be flagged, and then we will moderate content according to our not our terms of service, if that's what I said before, but our user guidelines. Within private groups, the group creator is that moderator. So if you create a private group, say you're a teacher and you create a private group, you're the one that's going to get a message saying an annotation has been flagged, and you're the one that has the power to hide that annotation from public view. We do have the power to hide annotations, as I said, and also to ban users. I will say from personal experience working at 2.5 years at Hypothesis that abuse has been almost entirely a theoretical issue for us. It has not been one that has had any true concrete example of somebody being abused or having an issue, but it certainly is one that we still need to be very conscious of, especially as the future of the web unfolds and annotation becomes hopefully a major part of it, and Hypothesis becomes a major player in that movement. That those things will obviously come up.
Yeah, there's a question about how Hypothesis works with web archiving. Obviously, when you're making annotations across content, you want to have reasonable certainty that you're going to have access to that content later. We're in discussions with the Internet Archive to have their Wayback Machine automatically cache a copy of a page shortly after a user is making an annotation there. So that's something that we realize is incredibly important, and we are working to make that happen. We're also in discussion with the digital preservation entities like Clocks to see if we can participate with them in not only storing the publicly available annotations that are of significance, but also making sure that the software capabilities are stored along with those.
So I just want to add one thing to that, or two things to that. One is that, if somebody sends a page to the Wayback Machine and then the page is changed or removed, you can activate Hypothesis at the Wayback Machine and read those annotations. Of course, they're stored by Hypothesis, so you could search a URL that's disappeared, say whitehouse.gov/climate change. You could go search that, which is most certainly disappeared if any such thing ever existed. And if somebody had archived that at the Internet Archive, you could call up annotations there. And of course, you could go search that URL or search the term climate change and see those annotations through Hypothesis. And, of course, if Hypothesis isn't around forever, you can download, you can pretty easily, we're going to make this part of the client, but you can, through the API and through some prototypes we've built, extract those annotations from Hypothesis. Now, the other thing to say is that if the content of an article, I'm not sure this relates to web archiving, so forgive me, but if the content of an article is changed but the URL remains, and an annotation can't anchor, we will display it as an orphan, meaning that a second tab after annotations will appear that says orphans and will show any annotations that, because of the underlying content, has shifted or in some way that makes it unable to anchor. We do surface those annotations still. So we're a preservation organization. We've definitely been thinking about this in our infrastructure from the beginning.
Yeah, and there's a related question about if the text is changed and the annotation refers to something that's been corrected, could it be marked as resolved? It's an interesting idea. As Jeremy mentioned, if text is edited, the annotations will continue to anchor. I think it has about a tolerance of like a 30% change to the content, for example. But I think what you're asking is similar to resolving a comment or a question in like a Google Docs scenario. It's not something we've had a partner request at the moment, but I could see a use case for it. So if that's something that you're interested in working on, get in touch.
And if I understand correctly, Heather, isn't it true that basically you could hack the moderation system to do that now with a private group by basically saying, okay, I'm going to flag and delete something that's essentially been resolved, and doesn't say resolve per se, but you could basically use it that way.
I mean,
and so it'd be easily updated to do that for kind of review.
There's a couple things. You could come along in the reply function and just indicate that something's resolved, either the person who made the original annotation or someone else who saw that it had been resolved. But I could imagine instances where some things you'd want a record of their existing and being resolved, and other things, maybe it's a typo, for example. It's just maybe better, and the moderator could then flag it and actually remove it, on the basis of it being not pertinent anymore to the document.
So there's another question about metrics associated with annotations. I'm not certain what that's asking, but it is. We do know for a fact that people who annotate are smarter, healthier, they live longer, they're more admired by their colleagues. No, I'm not. Do you understand what that question is exactly?
Yeah. So we got a lot of questions from publishers about the metrics that we currently capture, or that we might capture, that would be beneficial. So there's a number of things that are captured via our API. The time that an annotation is created, the URL or URI, where that annotation lives, the text of that annotation, if it's removed, some other indicators, for example, along those lines. So when we talk to publishers and they say, well, what else could you capture for us? We say, well, what would be useful to you, for example? So in an instance where publishers say auto-generating Hypothesis accounts based on information in their own system, we would be able to tell them how many folks actually, utilize that capability and had accounts generated. If we were creating the accounts on their behalf, we could see who's coming in from the publisher site and creating accounts. But there are probably, other things that we can capture. We're in some conversations to do some research with some other entities around trying to look into the number of contents and the number of annotations that an article receives, and then trying to look within the content of those annotations to see if it's a kind of a positive or a negative indicator on, say towards peer review, for example. And it goes beyond just the numbers. The publicly visible annotations that we create are surfaced by the Crossref event data project. So they will be indexed as that goes through the system, indexed by Google and findable and discoverable in the way that the other Crossref events data topics are chosen. But if there are other metrics that would be useful for us to collect on your behalf, that's the kind of thing we would love to know.
Yeah, and I'll just add that in terms of education use case and research that might be done, We can add more, but there's also tons to be gathered just from the open API. So if, say University of Michigan has a set of classes that they're studying, they can use the API to find out when students are annotated, how much each student annotated individually, how much the class annotated. The contents of the annotation can be mined, can be text mined for most commonly used words and things like that. I have never done this myself or seen somebody do it, but you could also analyze them sentimentally, see how how people are responding emotionally to a text and things like that. There's a lot to be done with the API. What's surfaced to the user, to the basic user at this point is pretty much just the counts. How many annotations has a person done total on a particular text, or how many annotations on a particular text, things like that.
All right. Oh, is there another question? Nope. Yep. Any metrics associated with annotations? Yep. Any other questions? A minute or two still to take a couple more. Oh, another one from Sarah.
So you don't, you can take Hypothesis with you behind a paywall and annotate there. So I could go into, say, JSTOR and annotate an article there, and then Heather could go into that same article on JSTOR and see my annotations if they were public, or if they were in a private group, if she was a member, she could see those annotations. More than through the paywall, well, the one thing I'll say is our proxy service does not work through paywalls because that's a security issue, but that just means you can't basically create a link to a paywall piece of content that has Hypothesis added. If you go through and see the ways that you can activate Hypothesis, the proxy is one of them. But carrying the browser extension in, you can annotate behind a paywall. The bigger issue, I think, is related to what was mentioned before, is how the content is being displayed inside of paywalls. I don't totally understand the landscape, and librarians, I'm sure, better do, but how a PDF is being presented, say, behind a paywall in a database that a library subscribes to. In some cases, those PDFs are hosted on a web page that has a stable URL. In some cases, they're inside of a viewer. That's more the problem that I see with classrooms accessing content behind paywalls, is how the content is presented. If it's in an iframe, then Hypothesis isn't going to work right now.
Yeah, if you can get to the content and someone shares an annotation with you, you will see the content anchored on that annotation. If you cannot get to the content, you will see the snippet or text that they selected and then what they wrote about it. But you may find yourself, on the abstract page, for example, and so the annotation won't be able to anchor, because it's obviously anchoring something that's within the article. We have had a number of publishers say that they would be interested in exploring the idea that if someone shares an annotation, the receiver of that annotation should be able to see the article, and trying to increase user engagement that way. So I think that that's probably something that we will be learning more about, but it's not a backdoor to the content.
And any other questions from folks?
Good questions.
Yeah, great question.
I think that's probably got it from everyone. So let me just thank both of you for this. This was fantastic, perfect level of information to introduce us to what Hypothesis is doing, but also a really good picture into how robust it really is. I learned lots of things about how far you're taking this and where it's going. So thanks very much again. And I know we're going to have lots of people interested in the recording too.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for having us.